Hey everyone, it's Tom Seymour. This is an introduction to Adobe Premiere. We're going to go over how to set up your file structures, how to start a project, how to use the basics of the timeline and whatnot. Okay, so the first thing is you're going to need those media files. Link is provided in your assignments, the assignment for this week. So you see, first off, if you look at the files, you can get a little details on these. So if we look, this is the resolution, 1280 by 720, and this clip's 3 seconds long. And you see these are mostly MP4s, and this is a pretty common file format that you're going to use. So they call this the file wrapper, right? So MP4 is a video file type. AVI was a really popular video type. But for the most part, we're going to be dealing with MP4s. So if we look, they're mostly MP4s here. These are brief clips. And you see the size. Very small clips, 5 or 6 megabytes, because they're not that long. This one's 3 seconds. But you see over here we have a WAV file, and that's a music file. So you notice we're not getting any resolution, but we can see the sample rate of 4800 sample rate. So from here, we have our media files, but we're going to do something first. We're going to set up a file, and we're going to call this footage. And then we're going to set up another file, new folder, and we're going to call this sound. And we're going to pull that WAV file in there, and then we're going to take the rest of this footage and we're going to put it here. So now what you have is your video footage, your sound footage, and we could actually rename this. We'll name this editing project 1. And so now when we start a new project, what we're going to do is save the file within this folder. Okay, so the way Premiere works, and it's very similar to DaVinci Resolve and a lot of these other nonlinear programs, though not Final Cut, they're doing their own thing. But you have the project file, and the project file is actually separate than your raw footage and your raw audio. So let's say you wanted to, you had your project file and you just put it on a thumb drive and brought it to a different computer and plugged it in. Well, you wouldn't have any of your footage connected to it, so all the whole thing would come up blank. And you may see that from time to time. And then you actually have to go and reconnect the media. And so, in general, what you want is some kind of main folder like this, editing project, with all of your raw footage in it. And that way, it'll be very simplified. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to start up Premiere. This may take a little while. So hopefully you all have computers that can run Creative Cloud. You need a minimum of 8 gigs of RAM. You need a machine. It's better to have a quad-core machine, although a dual may handle it if there's enough RAM. Okay, so I'm going to start a new project, and it's going to ask me what to name it, and I'll just call this, you may want to put your name in there, maybe like Seymour Editing 1. And then we're going to browse, and we want to make sure we put this back in our editing project here. So we're going to hit OK on that. And then if you go back into your file system, look, there's the project right there. So everything is all together. You really need to keep it neat like that. If you end up being a professional editor, things need to be set up a certain way so that if someone has to pick up the edit from you, it's not like a giant mess. Okay, so this is our setup. Normally what you do is you'd hit File, New, Sequence. That's what I meant, and it would come up with all these options, and you would have to sort of pick what camera you shot on, what resolution you shot on, and you know, it was a good thing, but it's very complicated. So there's a much easier way to do this, and this is how I still do it today. And I've edited a number of features and countless short films. This is the simplest thing to do. So if we look at this area, this is an area where we can import media, and I still like to use this option to import the media. Some people do it a different way where they're using a media browser. I like to edit right from the I like to import my footage. Okay, so the easiest way to do it is actually go to where your footage was, and drag in your video footage. It'll import that, and then you're gonna drag in your sound footage. And then if you tab down, you can see the files are here. I like to use the icons. Let's see if I can get this to change here. I like to see it this way, these physical files. So if you see right next to the pen, I've enabled this. So what it does is we can actually see some thumbnails of the footage. So I much prefer that. So if yours is not set up that way, you can change that. So what happens, we have our footage here. What happens when we double click on a clip? Well, it pops up in this left window. This is known as the preview monitor. Preview monitor because this is not our edit. This is just for looking at footage. Okay, so we can play the clip. We hit the play button here. We can rewind the clip with the mouse. You can also, using J, K, L, you can jog forward, K will pause, L will advance, J will rewind. So there's a lot of different things you can do in that regard. But just to keep it simple, you can just drag to a point you want, and that's easy enough. Now, the way you cut typically is to put an in and an out point. And that is determining what part of the clip that you want. So let's just play around here. So we're going to play it for a sec. Let's say I don't want this guy walking around on the left. So I'm going to start the footage after they have exited. So I'm going to hit I for in there. I'm going to end it pretty close to the end of the clip. Okay. What I'm going to do is left click on the mouse, hold, and drag this down. Okay. This has done a number of things. One of the first things it does is it sets up your sequence. This is your sequence here, right? Your timeline. It sets up the sequence exactly to the type of footage that you are cutting. So there's no mystery here. You don't have to fix the aspect ratio. You don't have to go through the settings. It's automatic. And so that's a really good, easy way to start the right kind of sequence. And then if you wanted to, you could output it at other various resolutions. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to hit File, Save. And you're going to have to get used to saving quite often. You can hit Command S to save. On PC, it's probably similar. It's probably Control S. Okay. So you notice what happens now. Footage popped up on a right-hand screen. This right-hand screen is I would call it the program monitor. And what it's showing is the actual edit that you're building. So that's our first clip. And then so we can go through, we double-click on a clip, and we listen to the clip. This one's got audio. Very good audio. Let's say we want to start the clip right from when the ball is being kicked. Well, we can use our arrow keys on the keyboard to inch forward frame by frame, or rewind frame by frame. So let's say I want to have it start here for some reason. I'll hit I for in, play it. And let's say I want the shot to end before the ball leaves frame. Hit O for out. Okay, so now you notice this section is selected, and what can I do? I can drag this into the timeline. See, if you look on the left, you see the video timeline here. Below it is the audio. So you see the audio below. And you can actually, if you want to see that zoomed in, you could pull down these tabs a bit. If you pull down the audio a lot, you'll start to see the waveform here, right? And you can actually raise and lower the volume using the line and just pulling and pushing that up and down. So now if we rewind back, we're starting to build our sequence. We have some nice aerial shots here. Hit in, let's say in here, out here, because this is when we're starting to see the pyramids. And let's say you needed to push these clips aside so that you could bring this clip down. Well, you can draw a box around them by clicking and holding and moving them down this way. Or you could use this track select tool here. But before we get into that, so you notice the video 1 and the audio 1 are selected. Now, that's for when you pull a clip down onto the timeline. Now, you can select a different track, different video track and a different audio track, and that would then behave a slightly different way. This is useful. It's more useful if you are editing in the more traditional way. There's another way to edit where you're actually dragging the clip over to this side, and there's different types of edits. Insert would put it directly where the control head is in the timeline. Replace would replace the whole clip. There's different ways to do that, but to be honest, if you're starting out, I wouldn't recommend doing that. And to be honest, I play around with the timeline so much, I don't use those. Those people do use those professionally, absolutely, but you don't need to. And when you're starting out, it's probably a little too much. So let's not worry about that. But let's say I just want to move all the clips down. Well, we're going to use this track select tool. This one will let you push everything down this way. And it's just an easy way to make room on your timeline, right? So the double arrows there, you'll see. That's a good tool to use. Similarly, you can use the backward one. That would pull, if you had clips on the other side, it would pull them the other way. So let's, we'll take this clip here. If we wanted to put it on the track above, we could actually do that, even though these are selected as like the sort of preference. But there's multiple ways to do things in Premiere, which is kind of cool. All right, so a lot of these clips are very good because they're heavily stabilized and they are all moving. So you notice this was sort of set up to be a, so that, you know, this is almost like a tourist video. So we're gonna keep working the edit. I'm gonna push these things in. Another option too is, like, if you didn't want to use those double arrows, you could right click here and hit ripple delete, and that would delete whatever that space was. You could, let's say you had a clip here and you wanted to get rid of that space, right click, ripple delete, it would butt those two clips together. So now we're starting to build, you know, a sort of sequence. And we're starting wide, that's pretty wide, and then we're starting to get more, this is still a wide shot, but we're not helicopter, that's really wide. Now we're getting more into the buildings and then more into the details. So what I would like you to do is to click around and use these clips, double click on the clip, add an in and an out point. That's a gorgeous shot right there, huh? And pull them onto the timeline. then you could rearrange stuff. Again, this is an easy way to do it. Click and hold and draw a box around stuff. And if you wanted to just move this over, switch this shot over there. So once you kind of get used to the program, it'll start to make sense. But here's the thing, like, it really is up to you. You have to keep cutting. The only way to get good at editing, proficient, and to master the tools is to really spend the time on it. So what I would actually recommend is you try to cut together a sequence using almost all of the clips and try to make your own edit. And make the goal of this to get used to the editing software. Okay, working on something specific usually will help you learn a little easier. But here's the other thing too. Let's use that sound, right? So we still had our sound clip, right? So we're going to go back to our folder and we're going to drag this sound folder in. And so now if we double click on that, okay, we actually had to drag in the wave file, so you might have to do that. Now we have our wave, and if we double click on that and play, then we notice it works very similar to a video clip. It's just we're only getting audio here. Now this whole song's about a minute long, so what we can actually do is drag this whole song down, and we're gonna, you notice there's a little audio icon right here. So with video, here, let's do this. If you're looking at video, you get this video icon, and it also has an audio icon. So let's say you didn't drag the image down to the timeline. Let's say you dragged just, it says drag video only. So we drag video only, so you only get the video. But then we can also drag the little waveform, audio only, and we'll only get the audio. So that's a way of, if you had a clip and you only wanted to pull down part of it, you could do that. Okay, so, and here's the thing too, if you do not want to use audio in this particular edit, then don't use audio. It's up to you. Okay, but I'm going to use it. And if you're not using audio, try to make your edit about a minute long. Okay, so I'm going to drag this underneath. You notice if I drag it below where there is not an audio clip, it will create a new one. So that's very cool. And then what we can do is, if you drag this down, you see the waveforms. So we're hearing this. The audio is bouncing at about minus 12 decibels. That's pretty good. That's a good level. So some of these clips, this scratchy audio that pops in, we don't really need this. So there's two things that you can do. If you mute the whole track, then all of the audio will be muted, so you probably don't want to do that. So for now, we're going to drag this down, and now we don't hear that. Okay, so what we're going to do is continue to build our edit. There's another gorgeous shot here. We're going to drag that in. Try to make sure you experiment with using I for in and O for out in your preview, and then experiment with dragging the video down, and then even just the audio down. See what this is. This is just static. Okay. So we're going to turn that. We're going to delete that actually. Look through. That's a gorgeous shot. Okay, this makes sense to try to match it with the other aerial of the pyramid. So maybe we'll drag these down here. Again, draw a box around the clip, drag them down, and then we'll pull this piece of video down. Let's see what that audio was. Ooh, okay, that's nice audio. I would actually leave that for now. There is If your audio becomes, let's say, disconnected from your video, sometimes you'll see something like this, and it'll show you that your video is 1 second and 3 frames ahead of your audio, and you can, but it'll sort of snap back. That's another thing to consider. There is this tool, there's this magnet. This magnet icon is like, it's for, it lets things sort of snap up next to something. So see how this kind of locks up, it butts right up against that? Well, if I have that disabled, then there's no, I can drag it frame by frame, and it never, along with the audio if I want, it won't lock into place. It's just fluid. And this is just better for more accurate cutting if need be. I mean, you can do it magnetically. Let's say I wanted this clip to, I didn't want this clip to be there. I could peel it back, and I'd peel back the audio too. Same thing with this. We can peel back the clip, pull the handle in. They call it the handle. So that's another way you can edit right on the timeline. Here's something to keep in mind too. Premiere works with layers. Okay, so if you've ever used Photoshop before, the layer that's on top is going to be the layer that pops through. So check this out. When we click on this aerial shot, what happens if I put this clip underneath here? Well, we don't see it at all, because whatever is on the top clip is going to pop through. So that would mean if I drag this under, you wouldn't see it because it's slapped under. So keep in mind that Premiere works in layers. For the most part, you can work with a few tracks. Think of it sort of a, track 1 and 2. You can use it that way, or track A and B. Let's say you were interviewing someone on track A. You could then put B-roll over that would pop through while the person's still talking. So that would be another, sort of way to use the layers in that way. We'll get way more into that later. And you don't have to memorize everything. I know I'm throwing a lot of stuff out at you, but the goal is to really just kind of, with this very simple project, throw some clips together, try to make it make sense, and try to make a nice little visual story out of what you have. Just to show you a few things, if you stretch out this bar at the bottom, it'll actually zoom your footage out, and you could zoom it in, and then you could push down the timeline. That's a useful tool, especially when you have a long edit. Another thing too is the other main tool you're going to use is the razor. So the razor will let you cut a clip, and then you can move those clips around. If you hit Command Z, it will undo. I just did that. I undid a few times. And then too, we'll get into this in much detail later, but let's say with audio, let's say you wanted a certain part quieter. Let's say it was too loud here. Well, you could use this little pen tool, and you could add these little nodes, a few in front of the place you want to lower the volume, a few behind, and then you'd go back to the select tool. You're going to have to do that a lot. That is V. If you hover over the arrow, you can see like the shortcut. Look, Control V, or this is just V. The blade is C. The pen is P. So with shortcuts, I don't do a ton. I do the razor, and then pretty much just back to the cursor. But so in regard to the pen tool, once we went back to the cursor, you could then just drag this down, and look, we created this little valley. So now when we hear it, it's a little quiet. quieter, right? That's a little erratic. We wouldn't want to do that, but just as an example, if we wanted this a touch quieter without it being too noticeable. So that is a way you can manipulate the audio. The razor tool you can chop clips right on your timeline, which is helpful. And then you could also hit delete if you chopped a clip and you didn't want it. So let's say we had our project done. This is only 20 seconds. I'm going to use that for now. What you can then do is we're going to export this. And so the way, when we say export, what we're doing is we're taking all this audio and we're taking all this video and we're making one file out of it. We're going to make one MP4 out of it. So how do you do that? You go, oh wait, before I show you that, if you don't like dragging clips in, if you don't like importing the way we did it, you can also do it this way. You can hit File, Import, and you can find the clips you want to import that way, and they will pop up here, okay? So that's something to keep in mind too. A few things before we export is that you'll see up here there's different styles of visual setup, and we will use the color one at some point, but for now you can stick with the editing setup. And another thing too is if you drag a window or close down a window or things get resized to the point where you don't like it and if things just seem really messy and you want to reset it to how it was, you can always go up here, reset to save layout. It will revert it back to how it looks here, right? So that's something to always do. Just to double check something, when you're exporting something, you want to make sure on your timeline you hit I for in, and when you get to the end of the sequence you want to hit O for out. Okay, now let's export. So we're going to hit File, we're going to hit Export, Media. Okay, so now there's a lot of different codecs, they call her. Codec means code or decoder, right? And it's a different type of file compression. So you can use H.264 compression. That's very popular as a finished format for the web. It's not really good for mastering other projects. You'd want to use Apple ProRes, something like that. Like when I delivered my latest feature, it was a 77-minute film. I was using Apple ProRes, so I was using QuickTime, and then Apple ProRes HQ422. That's a type of high quality Apple ProRes. So the file was several hundred gigs. So you can imagine that's not the most efficient file format if you're just putting something on the web. But the latest Premiere makes it really easy. So if you look under here, you're going to put this on H.264 first. That's our web-friendly exporting. And then from here, there's a lot of settings, but we know this was a 720 video, and for the most part, you should export. If you shot it in 720, then you should probably be exporting in 720. But you can upscale it, right? So you could do 1080 and it would probably look fine, and people do that all the time. So that's something to keep. You'd have to experiment on your own, but it's something you can do. So for us, you can do the YouTube exporting or the Vimeo. I think the Vimeo is slightly higher quality. For our purpose, we can just do the YouTube 720p HD, and from there we have to put an output name. So put your last name, and then editing 1. We'll call it editing 1, and then you're going to find that. in your editing project, and you could actually make a file and call this exports, and then you could put it in there, and we'll hit export. You could also add it in a queue, an editing queue. What that would do is you could set up several exports. Let's say you wanted to make a 1080p one, a 720p one, a 4K one. These are all different resolutions, by the way. You know, most TVs nowadays are, 4K TVs. You know, it's there's two different 4K resolutions. One's called Ultra HD, and the other one's True 4K. So let's see, what is that? Let's check that. Okay, yeah, 3840 by 2160. That is Ultra HD, right? But we don't have to worry about that. Okay, so we're going to go to 720p YouTube. And then also 1920 by 1080 is regular high definition, which is pretty good. Footage that's shot in 1080p on, put on a 4K TV usually looks fine. The resolution is good. 4K is awesome. But if you don't have that type of camera, don't worry about it. Or if you're shooting on your phone and you don't want to shoot 4K, it's fine. Okay, so we're going to hit export. Okay. All right, now from there, we can go back to your Finder and open this up, and let's play it. So that's fine as an example. A lot of the way this class is going to work is you're going to be uploading to YouTube. So if you don't know how to start a YouTube channel, there's a link to that under the assignment. But it's very simple. You're using your Gmail account, and most of you probably already had YouTube files. So you would select the file. And the only thing you want to make sure you do is that when you go to the visibility, the publishing options, you want to make sure that it's unlisted. Where is that? Here. Okay, so you want to make for the purposes of this class, you want to make all your videos unlisted, and the reason is you want to be able to post links in the discussion group. So this edit, you're going to go to the first editing project discussion group. You're going to post this unlisted link so that all your classmates can watch. And the good thing about unlisted is it's not searchable. It won't show up, so only the people with the link can see it. So you want to do that. You don't want to do the private one because we just don't want to, we don't want to deal with passwords and stuff like that. So here you're going to get the shareable link. It says copy to clipboard, and then what you can then do is in the discussion group, you paste the link, and then what you're going to do is you're going to watch everyone else's cuts, and we're going to comment on them. Okay, so I'm sure there's a million different questions, but the best way to edit is to just sort of input that footage, play around with it on the timeline, and try to make it work. That is the best way to learn, is to finish a project. So if you have questions, please post in the discussion board. There's a question section, but go over all your materials and read everything first, and asking a question in the discussion board is like the last resort. You can always email me as well, but the ability to be self-sufficient is going to be it's going to be something. It's going to be something you want to strive to become. Okay, well, thanks for listening, and good luck, and we'll watch your edits.